Dust. Did you ever hear tell of such a silly thing? At my house, we undust the furniture. But to each his own way. Amelia Bedelia took one last look at the bathroom. She saw a big box with the word dusting powder on it. Well, look at that. A special powder to dust with, exclaimed Amelia Bedelia. So Amelia Bedelia dusted the furniture. That should be dusty enough. My, how nice it smells. Draw the drapes when the sun comes in, read Amelia Bedelia. She looked up. The sun was coming in. Amelia Bedelia looked at the list again. Draw the drapes? That's what it says. I'm not much of a hand at drawing, but I'll try. So Amelia Bedelia sat right down and she drew those drapes.
Okay, so I'm going to pause there. You can see where this book goes. All the books are like that. But this is a lot like the interactions we see with our SMEs and IDs. We are Amelia Bedelia. We think we're speaking the same language. We think we're communicating clearly. We send our SMEs off with tasks, and we can't wait to see the progress that they've made at the next meeting. And we think what we said made sense, and so did they, until you see how they interpreted what you said. We all have our feelings about that, and then we all have our thoughts and opinions about the other person, whether it's positive or negative. So that just kind of sets the stage. So here's our framework. So we've got arrows within this framework because it's really a cycle. You're always moving through it, but it's going to start with you, which is why it's at the top. So the 3 steps: check yourself, check your language, and then check your, and we will always be cycling through that throughout the entire process as we're working together. So if you have ever been to any type of counseling, read any books about therapy, or just done some self-reflection work, the first thing you're always going to hear is you've got to focus on you first. So that's why I place us at the top of this framework. We really have to check ourselves first. So what I want you to do is think about like your conferences, symposiums, webinars that are really geared towards IDs, like that training education crowd. What are, and you can throw this in the chat, what are some common things that you always hear IDs say about their SMEs? So I want you to just put either something you said, things that you always hear, just throw it in the chat. Okay, Christine, they never follow timelines. I hear that all the time too. Resistant to change or innovation, also hear that a lot. They complain about how their students don't read, but then they don't read my directions. I resonate with that. Use understanding outcomes. They don't provide content. They don't understand our needs. So what I think you can see is that we hear these things when we go into the spaces with IDs. So now, how do you think that may affect your mindset when you're going into a collaboration with the SME, whether you've worked with them or not, whether it's you've been working in ID for 20 years or you're just brand new? If you're hearing this rhetoric, how do you think that's going to affect your mindset when you then start working with a SME? And you can put that in the chat as well. And I'm still here in case I look frozen, but I'm giving everybody a chance to actually put this in the chat. So again, how do you think that this rhetoric affects how you approach your SMEs? Okay, you think it changes how you approach your relationship to them as a partner? Absolutely. That's how I felt when I started going to training conferences and I was brand new. I'm like, oh, well, I may have a different opinion about SMEs, even though I hadn't had a chance to work with them yet. Creates an us versus them atmosphere. Yes. Unclear on who needs to do what. Limits of ID role. We are braced for impact. That is it in a nutshell. So we're going into that relationship with a bias, whether that's because how we feel or because we've heard others say it so much that we start to believe it. So when we talk about bias, we've got to remember we've all got biases, no matter how trivial they are. We just have them, but we have to be aware of those and how they'll show up in their work. So there are lots of types of bias that people focus on. I kind of picked out the ones that I tend to see most often, like in general, and then in the work that we do. So affinity bias is when we unconsciously prefer people who share similar qualities as us. So again, go back to that whole us versus them comment that we had in chat. Those people feel familiar to us, they feel safe to us, so that's who we want to be around. So that really can influence which means we want to work with for a project if we get a choice, or choose for a project, though they may or may not be the best person for that job. So attribution bias is how we assess others versus how we assess ourselves. So if I accomplish something great, it has to be because of my skill and personality. And if I fail at something, it's due to circumstances beyond my control. It was not my fault. But that reverses when it goes to others. When they accomplish something, it's because they got lucky. And when they don't do something as great, or maybe something they're working on fails, it's because they did it wrong, they have poor planning, they have poor capabilities, they can't possibly have a good skill, or maybe have circumstances beyond their control. So confirmation bias is when we search for proof or evidence that backs up our own opinions instead of looking at the whole picture. We get very selective, we have selective observation, we overlook the information as a whole and focus on what fits our viewpoint. So let's say you've got a very busy SME and people talk about the difficulties with their scheduling for them and how like they don't always make meetings. So it's now time for you to work with your SME. They're usually on time for your meetings, but maybe there's a couple of times when they're late or they didn't show up. So you ignore all the times that they were on time with you. You focus on the few times they were late and you label them unreliable. So your halo and your horns effect. Halo occurs when we focus on this particularly impressive feature about somebody. So like everything they do is perfect. It's in a positive light. It's in a positive halo light. So that makes us think that they are maybe more perfect than they really are. So we'll overlook other information that may balance that out. Then your horns are literally the opposite of halo. We focus on all the negative features about somebody and we make a judgment about them. And so again, that's clouded. So how does that affect our work with them? It affects every aspect of what we need to do, really. It affects our planning, the conversations we have with them. It affects our ability to build rapport. Again, you already went into it with a negative mindset. How can you build rapport from a truly neutral place? It affects like our project management, creating courses, creating assessments. It affects everything. So what can you do? Combat some of that bias and stereotypes. We talk about doing the stereotype replacement. Create a non-stereotypical alternative to your stereotypes. Your SME is always late. Okay, well, that's maybe a stereotype, maybe a little true, maybe not all the time true. What about if they're always on time? Just counter it. And that also goes into countering some of those imaging. Remember somebody from your SME group who didn't fit that stereotype. I'm always a little caught off guard when I get a great doctor or nurse who they go into Canvas, they grade, they are fine giving feedback. I'm like, this is not common. So I always remember that person when I need to counter some of my bias. Perspective taking, put yourself in their shoes. I think not only in our work but personal lives, we can do a better job of that. See everybody as an individual and then keep your attention on the present moment. Were they late? Yes. Are they here now and they're willing to stay later? Also, yes. So focus on what's going on in that present point. So we've talked about checking yourself, checking your bias. So we've got to pivot and start talking about checking our language. Now, if you are I think I saw at least one person from our job. You don't get to participate in this because you understand everything on this slide. We're going to simulate how your SMEs probably feel during your working meetings. So let's say I'm getting together with you all and we're going to have a meeting. I'm going to give you some information and then I'm going to give you some tasks that I want you to follow up with for your next meeting. So you've got Mr. H who presents to the ER, complaining of hemoptysis, fever, and weight loss. Chest x-ray shows worsening upper left lobe infiltrate. CT shows cavitary lesion, placed in an airborne isolation, TSP positive, sputum smear negative, or sputum smear AFB positive, QFT negative, HIV negative. So I want you to go ahead and get them started on right, get the RVCT form filled out, and then repeat their labs. And I also want you to get LFTs done as well. And we will regroup next week. Insane. I want you to put into chat how you are feeling in this moment. I gave you a little background. I gave you a little bit of information about what I need you to do. Go ahead and start putting into chat. You might identify as person A. You got everything on the chart. You got my instructions. You're ready to go. You might be B, like, I'm screaming because I really don't know what she said. I know I need to do something. I know you want me to do something, and I don't know what I'm supposed to do. And you could be C, like, I was too busy trying to read what she asked for. I don't know what any of these acronyms mean. I saw somebody say Scrubs flashback. You could be any of those. Now, this may be a slightly exaggerated example. Unless you are in the TB world, then it's truly not exaggerated. I did pull that information from a course we do with our doctors and nurses. But that's how your SMEs feel. You speak in a language that they're not familiar with. They don't have a clue what you're saying. When you get in there and say, we need to do the course map and then create the assessments and learning objectives, and I need you to come out and fill out this revision form, you may as well have told them what I just gave you. They don't know what you're saying. And they are somewhere between B and C. And what's going to happen? You're going to get back to that next meeting and they will have done nothing. And then you will be frustrated. They will be frustrated because you all weren't speaking any common language. So we've got a lot of jargon in the education and the ID field. So even just sitting in the presentations yesterday, I was putting myself in a SME's shoes. And I'm thinking just how much of what we talk about makes no sense to anybody else outside of this group. Like I sat in a great session about the different types of learning we can do. And we get confused ourselves. We were talking about asynchronous, high, flex, hybrid, flipped, all these different terms that we ourselves are trying to figure out. So they don't have a chance. But our SMEs do have language that is similar to ours. So we've got to get on the same page. So like we may say things like your course map, task analysis, LMS, that stuff is common to us. They've got a language too. They just may say course agenda instead of course map. That it may not be doing the same thing, but they mean it to do the same thing. They may talk about, and like in our case, it would talk about a job description. For LMS, they may just simply say, like, where are we putting this thing? That is your keyword to say they're probably talking about an LMS. They don't know what to call it. So it's important that we think about how can we adjust the wording that we use. So what I'm going to do now is that I want you to try out a few of these. So these are just things I thought about that we hear a lot. And I want you to, let's take assessments first. What are other words? If you're working with a SME, they are not familiar with assessments. Like our doctors, when we said assessment, they panicked, had flashbacks to medical school, and were like, we can't do a test. And that's not what we meant. So what are some other words that you could use instead of assessment for your SME? So I want you to put that in the chat. Okay, I see evaluation, I see writing, tests, quizzes, student learning activities, knowledge check, graded quizzes, discussions, papers, activity. So those are all great. That gets at to what assessments could be. And then that lets our SMEs kind of build up what could it be. Again, in our case, we were like, it's not a test. It doesn't, we just need to know that they learn the material. Okay, so what about asynchronous learning? That's a little challenging. And it doesn't have to just be a one word, but give me a few words if you had to try to describe this or give some other language instead of using that word. Why don't you put in chat, what could that be? Okay, a class that takes place all online, no Zoom. I like that one. Online course, distance learning, personalized timing course engagement, learning on your, I like that. Learning on your own time. That starts to get at like, what do we mean by it? Okay, this is harder. Instructional design. I could say instructional design or maybe instructional designer if you just had to try to give a few words to that. What about that one? Okay, instructional support, course creation therapy. I hope that we have a chance to save this chat because there are some gems in here that I think I will use. Create your course. Okay, now how would you describe learning? Okay, look, the person that helps you get all your stuff into your online course and makes it structurally sound, organizing your content. I love these. So what about learning objectives? Let's try that one. How to get paid. What will your students learn? What students need to know? What will the student be able to do and will do in the assignments before the end of the course? Student outcomes, learning outcomes, or goals. Okay, this is perfect. And now how will we describe goals? How will we describe what our course goals are? Because even we get confused between goals and objectives. I like that one that Amy said, how your assignment structure will enable students to learn. I like that one. Okay, so what about course goals? How do we describe that? Oh, big takeaways for future career. Course purpose. I like that too. It's the so what? Why are we here? That's your course goal. I like that. Okay, now can you all think of any other terms that you will say, yeah, we use this phrase all the time, and now I need other wording to better help with that? Do you all have some other terms that you all may use? Oh, I like, so there too that I want to do. So alignment, I'm curious. Let's work on that one because I love that one because I hear that all the time too. How would you describe alignment to your SMEs? So I know when we do a course map, we always talk, oh, we need to align it. We need to make sure this matches to this and this is attached to here. How do we go and describe that concept or word to our SMEs? Making sure that objectives match to assignments and course materials in a linear fashion. I like that. Okay, and then what about educational technology? And we'll let that one, oh, before I go to that one, differentiate between aligning delivery outcomes and methods from the course itself, the connection between the things they are learning and showing they are doing those things in the course. I love that. That's a great explanation. Now, what about educational technology? And we just had this conversation on our team as well, because it made sense to us, but we don't know if it actually makes sense to our other folks who aren't in this world. So what's another way of explaining educational technology to our SMEs? Tools for learning. I like that. And then I'll probably wait for a couple more and then we can keep going. You got anything else for educational technology, or is that one tricky? Or maybe tools for learning captured it, because that really is almost like a mic drop moment here. Okay, well, I see a lot of hearts, so I'm going to take that as that was a great answer and we can't beat that one. I see your course is the tool bag. The instructions need to be clear, not IKEA style in the finished product and student work. I don't put things together and IKEA instructions make no sense to me. So that is a great example. So we're not, I think this is a great way to get us thinking about some of these words. And then you maybe while you have nothing else to do and you're thinking about the presentation later, take some time and think through some of the words that you use consistently when you're working on a course or an assessment, whatever it might be with your SME, and then brainstorm other ways of phrasing those terms and then talk about it with your SME. So that'll just help make sure that you're speaking the same language, and it is going to save you from a headache down the line. So now part of checking your language is also checking how you work and how your SME works, because that's going to influence how you communicate and what language you use. So Dale Ludwig has a great book called Effective SMEs that I've read a few times. And in it, he talks about like how we have two primary working styles. So you've got the writer and the improviser, and you're going to identify with one of these. So your writer is the person, they love to plan, they love to organize, they want to practice, they do things ahead of time, hate last minute adjustments, they want this logical path forward, not a fan of speaking off the cuff. Very type A, I'd almost say, but not in a negative way. Then you've got that improviser. They're the I'm easy to get into the conversation. I could get lost in my conversation, but people, it made sense in their head. They are happy to wing it. They kind of may be running in and then they'll run back out. Things don't always need to be logical. They will often procrastinate, but they'll always get the job done. So we each have one of these that we identify with. We may go between both of these in any given station, but one's going to be more dominant or just more comfortable with us. So like you can think about like which one of these resonates most with you. Think about where you feel like you fall, and then think about your SMEs that you at least know and where they fall. Now, if you don't know where they fall, it is okay to ask them. I find there's no need to guess, you just ask. In the book, he also gives some great tips for like how you leverage the strengths of each style and then where there are opportunities to grow. And then like knowing our style is just key to how we talk, how we work with our SMEs. So keep that in mind as you're working with your SMEs. So at this point, you're probably like, this is a great counseling session. Stefani, you told me I have to work on myself, but like I still have to work with them. So like, what about them? That is what we always say in therapy when we're like, but what about the other person? So yes, we're going to start talking about how you check with your SME. So best way to check with your SME is get to know them. Find out how they like to work. Do they like hard, fast deadlines, or like I really prefer more like guidelines, and let me work off of this. Great example. Our nurses are they're a writer. Our nurses are a writer. They're like, give me step A, B, and C. Tell me when to follow it. Give me the deadline, and I'm going to go to that deadline. Our doctors, they want the guidelines. They're like, let me know more or less what you want me to do, but they need wiggle room. If you give them a deadline, they're not going to meet it. There's no need for you to get upset. They really wanted more of a guideline. Do they prefer working meetings or do they prefer more asynchronous work? Do they identify as that writer or improviser? Now, it is very easy for me to easily put our SMEs into this category, and it truly is by profession because our nurses are going to do a working meeting in a heartbeat. Our doctors are like, tell me what to do, and I will fit it into my schedule and do it asynchronously. And then I'll come back and we'll see if they did it or not. Work on building rapport with them and just find out more about them. Put aside the project, just get to know them. So I would say that though that's the key to any effective relationship, but like it is a relationship between the ID and the SME. Carve out, especially if you're a writer, carve out your time at each meeting just to check in with them and get to know how you're doing. Don't care about the project, just dedicate some set time just to chatting with them. Now, if you're an improviser, you could probably leave building that rapport throughout. If you're comfortable with, we're talking about a meeting, then I had a thought and I went off on that tangent and eventually I come back. But if you're not comfortable with that, build it in. And it's not an agenda that you send to them. It's more like, I know I've built in this time just to talk and get to know them. So my best relationships with our doctors and nurses are the ones where we've just taken the time to build that rapport. And that does not mean we agree all the time. We have butted heads. But even when we disagreed, we knew it was built on a foundation of respect and true caring for one another. And that's why we've been able to make a lot of progress that we've made in our organization. So just take that time to get to know them before diving in to that project. And then after you're getting to know them and you're finding out some of these things, you can always refer back to that later if things are getting tough, because you kind of talked about what you prefer at the beginning. So we also want to be an investigator. You have to be curious about what's going on. Find out what their experience has been, in our case, attending professional development or classes. So we talked to a lot of our folks, well, are you in school? What do you like? A lot of them will say, oh, I really just needed to understand how this worked in a practical standpoint. And I didn't really like all the lecture, but then they turn around and then give a lecture to their folks. So it helps them to be in a learner position to then learn a little bit more. Find out what their kids might say about our courses. One of our doctors, he did fight us tooth and nail on trying to make some of the stuff more interactive for the courses that we do. And then his son went into medical school and his son was like, oh, I hate all this didactic. I love when we can practice it. And he came back like, can you believe it? He doesn't like the didactic stuff. And we're like, you don't say. So that may be a way, one, of building rapport and then getting a history with what's going on. Find out if they have experience with instructional designers or know what they do. Now, you'll get bonus points if you can also find out how they feel about the profession, because I say the thing that nobody else wants to say. Most people feel like they are an instructional designer. They are probably like, I could put together a course, at least content-wise. They might not get it into an LMS, but like, I could put together a training. So find out how they feel about it. Find out if they've had any frustrations with creating content, working with an ID, or like just a training and education team. So like we heard a lot of times, just like on our team, like, well, you don't really understand what we do and what we really need to be able to know to do our job. And then we'll likewise say, well, you don't know what we need to do our job. So find out where the frustrations are. What's their experience creating learning objectives and course goals? Like, what do they think the purpose is? And then like pull some examples and show them. Like, I am a person that works off examples. I need to see it and understand it. Then I can talk about what we're doing. Just be genuinely curious in what's going on, and that will help make that collaboration go a lot more smoothly. So if you talk to a man in a language he understands, that goes to his head. If you talk to him in his own language, that goes to his heart. So in our office, everything we do is tuberculosis. So it's very easy to learn the world of tuberculosis and then speak in their own language. You have to show interest in what your SME does. Take your time to learn at least a little bit about the profession. You're not going to be an expert, but just make the effort to learn a little bit about it. Ask them questions what their profession is like. What do they actually do? Ask them what their folks need to know to be able to do their job. Now, let's say you're working with students. Ask them what their students need to know to be in that profession. How did their students get into that class? Is that class on a track for a certain major? So somebody at our job, not working with tuberculosis, wanted to pick my brain about content for her immunology course. Now, my background is health ed. I know public health. I know nothing about immunology, not a thing. So she went through what she wanted to teach. So I was curious. I was asking, well, what's the purpose? Why did they get into that class? I'm like, well, I don't know anything about immunology. So if you're teaching me, like, what did I really need to know? And she was like, well, you really only need to know this, but I just find it so fascinating about this other stuff. And I'm like, then make that other stuff a resource page because you just told me what you needed. It only took me being genuinely curious about her course and asking some questions. I didn't talk about a course goal. I didn't use that word. I didn't use learning objectives. I just genuinely asked out of curiosity. And she teased out that presentation, and it took me maybe 5 minutes. And she was excited to talk about it. So if you can speak their language and show interest in their topic, you really do speak to their heart. And I think that puts yourself in a position to really work well together. You're no longer like what somebody said, it's like a us versus them. You're no longer on opposite sides. You're really walking together to create something great. And you see the big picture. You see the so what. It's not just about creating the course. It's about that end goal for whatever that end goal may be. So I say we have 10 minutes left. Well, now that's cut down, which is perfect. So as we close, I just want you all to think about what we've talked about, think about like what you've seen in the chat, and then what's one thing that you want to work on after attending this session? What's something that you say, I could really do this a little bit better, or I really got to look at this and see how I could apply it to work. Or maybe you're like, I really want to learn more about this thing and how it could affect how I work with my SMEs. What's one thing you want to do differently or work on? And just place that in the chat. And I also just placed the treasure hunt code for this session in chat as well. And again, I'm not frozen. I'm waiting for the chat to start rolling in. Giving y'all a chance to type. Okay, see, checking myself. That's the one that I work on, and I think I will probably work on until the day that I die. I seem to be stuck in that loop. How to translate your process for students who are learning to create digital artifacts or learning modules. Someone said, I need to work more on asking more about why they teach what they teach. That way, you know their perspective on the material. And if you ever get a chance, seeing if you can pop into a class, again, you never know like what everybody's schedule looks like, what folks allow, what they don't. We just asked to shadow some of our doctors and then hop on some calls as they're talking through their patients, not because we're clinicians, but just because we want to have a better understanding of, well, what are you doing? What are the questions that come up? Are you even at your computer, or are you trying to take a call on the phone because you're out seeing patients? Okay, we're gonna give just a few more minutes. Okay, let's see, relationships with faculty and checking yourself. There's SMEs and education. I think that's great that you're a teacher and now into ID. So asking more about the content and pinpointing what students absolutely need to know versus what can be a resource. Yes, that was, and I genuinely wanted to know, like, okay, teach me immunology in 3 minutes. Tell me what in this presentation I got to know to get it. Okay, so we've got about 5 minutes left before the next session. So If you have any questions, feel free to email me. I know that they're recording this presentation, so I assume that they will send it out. If for any reason you want a copy of the presentation with the notes, I can send that to you as well. I hope it was valuable. Even just putting together this presentation was therapeutic for me because we have our own struggles with SMEs. Does UF provide a planning tool for faculty which is shareable? That is a good. Brooke, now correct me if I'm wrong. I don't want to put you on the spot. Brooke, I think you're also at UF, so you may know if UF has. That's what I thought. I was gonna say you may know if we have a planning tool, but if you don't, we've got an ID on our team who may know the answer to that. And Amy, I can jot down your information and then ask, and I can send you a message to find out. Planning tool for. I know they have a lot of stuff for faculty, and usually I think it should be shareable. That's what I thought. That's what I thought, Brooke. Okay, well, that is the end of this presentation. Feel free to email me or send me a message on the cool little platform that we have for TOPkit, and I will talk to you all throughout the conference.
All right. Thank you very much, Stephanie. That was really fantastic. Yes, we are recording these sessions. I did forget for the first minute or so, so it started right when you started showing the Mealy video, but it is the rest of it is recorded. I'm going to save the chat also, so I'll send that to you as well, and then we can share that with anybody else that would like that as well. But thank you very much, Stephanie. I appreciate it. We at this point there is a break scheduled until 2 o'clock. So you'll have a little bit of time to buy a break or get some more caffeine or whatever else you need to do. The code, again, I did post in the chat. It is seamless improvement for this hour, just an underscore between the two words. And then I will see you all back at 2 o'clock. If you're back in this room, I'll see you then. If not, enjoy the rest of your sessions.